My beloved child, something happened last night that you were never supposed to notice, and yet somehow, your energy felt the change before your mind could explain it. There is someone who has been quietly watching the little things you do online, not because they have nothing else to do, and not because they are simply curious, but because they are searching for something they are afraid to ask you about directly. They have been checking your updates, noticing when you disappear, paying attention to the moments when you suddenly become active, and wondering who might be receiving the attention they secretly wish were meant for them. And last night, something about your social media presence made them stop completely. They saw something, or perhaps they noticed the absence of something, and their entire perspective shifted. Don't skip this part, because the reason they keep checking on you is far deeper than you realize. Stay till the end, because something huge is waiting for you, and the final piece of this story may explain why their behavior has felt so confusing lately. You may have wondered why someone would repeatedly look at your profile without saying anything, why they would appear silently and disappear without leaving a trace, why their attention seems to become stronger whenever you pull away. The truth is, they are not simply looking at your pictures. They are looking for evidence. Evidence that you still remember them. Evidence that your heart has not completely moved on. Evidence that there is still a small opening where they might someday return. Every post, every change, every quiet period has become a message in their mind. They have been studying patterns they probably never intended to study. They notice when you post more than usual. They notice when you become quiet. They notice when your words sound unusually confident. They notice when you seem happier. And the strangest part is that they may never admit any of this to you. They would rather pretend they are casually scrolling than confess that one particular person keeps appearing in their thoughts whenever your name appears on their screen. Last night, however, their usual confidence disappeared. Something they saw reminded them of a moment between you that they had tried to bury. Suddenly, the screen in front of them did not feel like a screen anymore. It felt like a doorway into memories they had been avoiding. They remembered your voice. They remembered something you once said that they dismissed at the time. They remembered the way you looked at them when you were trying to understand what they were not saying. And then came the question that shook them: what if they have finally stopped waiting for me? That question changed everything. They began looking through your recent activity again, almost hoping to find one tiny clue that would prove they still mattered. They were not looking for perfection. They were looking for a sign. A sentence. A picture. A familiar expression. Anything that could tell them that the connection they felt was not something they had imagined. But instead of finding the reassurance they wanted, they noticed something unexpected. You seemed different. Stronger. More private. More difficult to read. And that frightened them because they suddenly realized they could no longer predict you. Before, they thought they knew when you would respond, when you would appear, when you would notice them. Now, you seem to be living in a world they cannot enter simply by watching from a distance. That realization created a strange mixture of admiration, regret, and fear inside them. They started asking themselves questions they had avoided for far too long. Why did I let this become so complicated? Why did I stay silent? Why did I assume they would always be there? Why am I checking their profile again when I promised myself I would stop? And there was one question that hurt the most. What if someone else is making them smile now? Don't skip, because that question is directly connected to what happened last night. You may think this is about jealousy, but it is actually about something much more emotional. This person has been using social media as a safe distance between themselves and you. From behind a screen, they can watch without risking rejection. They can wonder without asking. They can miss you without admitting that they miss you. They can look at your life without having to explain why they are still interested. But last night, that safe distance suddenly felt unbearable. They saw something that made them realize that watching you is not the same as being part of your life. And for perhaps the first time, they understood that time does not wait for anyone. You can watch someone's life for months, even years, and still wake up one day realizing that the person you hoped would remain exactly where you left them has continued growing. That is what they saw in you. Growth. And it unsettled them. They remembered the version of you who once wanted answers, who once wanted clarity, who once wondered why they were acting distant. They remembered moments when you may have reached out emotionally, only to receive uncertainty in return. They remembered how easily they assumed that you would continue caring no matter how long they remained silent. But now they are beginning to understand the cost of that assumption. Your silence has become louder than your words. Your absence has become more noticeable than your presence. And every time you do not react, they wonder whether the connection has finally changed forever. Stay till the end, because there is another layer to this story that is much more surprising. They are not only watching to see whether you have moved on. They are watching to see whether you have become the person they always believed you could become. Somewhere inside them is a strange realization: they may have underestimated you. They may have mistaken your patience for weakness. They may have mistaken your quietness for lack of confidence. They may have thought that because you cared deeply, you would always remain emotionally available. But now they see something different. They see someone who has learned to protect their peace. Someone who no longer needs to explain every feeling. Someone who can walk away from confusion without creating a scene. And that quiet strength is becoming impossible for them to ignore. Last night, they looked again. Perhaps expecting to find the old version of you, but instead they encountered a person who seemed almost unfamiliar. That was the moment their heart became restless. They started wondering whether you had met someone new, whether you were happier without them, whether the life they secretly hoped to return to had already moved forward. They may have even opened your profile more than once, closed it, then returned again moments later. Not because they had found the answer, but because they were afraid of the answer. There is a powerful difference between wanting to know something and being ready to know it. They want to know where your heart stands, but they are terrified that the truth might tell them they waited too long. That is why their behavior may seem contradictory. One moment they appear interested, the next they disappear. One moment they seem close, the next they become distant. One moment they want your attention, the next they act as though nothing matters. But beneath that inconsistency may be a battle between two emotions, the desire to come closer and the fear of what might happen if they do. They are watching because they want certainty. Yet every time they watch, they become more uncertain. Every new post creates another question. Every quiet day creates another theory. Every change in your life becomes another clue they try to interpret. And the most important clue of all may be the one you never intentionally posted. It is your silence. Your silence is making them think. Your silence is forcing them to confront feelings they could previously distract themselves from. Your silence is asking a question without words. If you truly care, why are you still watching from a distance? Something happened last night that made that question feel real to them. They suddenly imagined a future where they could no longer see you online, where your name stopped appearing, where your updates became invisible to them, where they no longer knew whether you were happy, where you were going, or who had become important in your life. And that thought hurt more than they expected. They realized that perhaps the thing they feared losing was not access to your social media. It was access to you. That is why you should pay close attention to what happens next. Because when someone has been silently watching for a long time, there eventually comes a moment when watching is no longer enough. They have to choose between remaining a spectator and finally becoming honest. Last night may have brought them closer to that decision. They may still hesitate. They may still overthink. They may still hide behind silence. But something has changed inside them. The person who once believed they could observe your life without feeling anything is beginning to understand that every time they look at you, they are revealing something about themselves. Their attention is exposing their attachment. Their curiosity is exposing their concern. Their repeated checking is exposing the fact that your life still matters to them. And perhaps that is the secret they have been trying hardest to hide, not from you, but from themselves. Don't skip, because the next part of this story becomes even more emotional. There is a reason they are specifically watching to see whether you have moved on, and it is connected to a fear they have never said aloud. They are afraid that the door they once left open has slowly begun to close. They are afraid that the person they assumed would always be there has finally learned how to live without waiting. They are afraid that one day they will look at your profile and realize that the chapter they kept postponing has already ended. And when that realization comes, no amount of silent watching can change it. That is why last night felt different. They were not simply scrolling. They were confronting a possibility. A possibility that you may no longer be waiting for an explanation. A possibility that your heart may have become peaceful without their presence. A possibility that they may have lost something precious because they were too afraid to speak when they had the chance. They looked at your world through a screen and suddenly wished they could step beyond it. They wished they could hear your voice instead of reading your words. They wished they could ask you what you really feel instead of trying to decode your posts. They wished they could know whether your smile was genuine or whether you were simply showing the world that you had learned how to move forward. And that is when the emotional weight of the night became impossible for them to ignore. They realized that they had spent so much time watching for signs that they had forgotten to create one of their own. They had waited for you to make the first move while secretly hoping you would somehow understand what they could not say. But love, connection, and unfinished feelings do not always communicate through screens. Sometimes silence creates distance rather than clarity. Sometimes watching someone is easier than admitting that you miss them. Sometimes a person can spend an entire night staring at a profile because sending one honest message feels more frightening than saying nothing at all. And perhaps that is exactly where they are now. Caught between the comfort of distance and the longing for closeness. Caught between pride and vulnerability. Caught between the past they cannot erase and the future they are afraid they may have already missed. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you, because there is one final detail from last night that changes the meaning of everything they have been doing. They did not just wonder whether you were thinking about them. They wondered whether you would recognize them if they finally returned. They wondered whether you would still feel the same warmth. They wondered whether you would ask questions they are not ready to answer. And most importantly, they wondered whether you would still believe their intentions if they finally became honest. That fear is significant. It means they know that watching from a distance has not solved anything. It has only delayed the moment when truth becomes necessary. And if you have felt recently that someone's energy around you has become strangely noticeable, that someone seems to be watching, waiting, appearing and disappearing, do not rush to conclusions. Instead, understand the deeper emotional pattern. Someone may be wrestling with the consequences of their own silence. They may be realizing that the person they once took for granted is not standing still anymore. You are moving. You are changing. You are becoming harder to predict. And that may be exactly what finally forces them to confront what they feel. Last night was not necessarily the ending of the story. It may have been the moment the story changed direction. The screen went dark, but their thoughts did not. They put the phone down, but the questions remained. They tried to sleep, but one image kept returning to their mind: you, living your life without knowing how closely they had been watching from afar. And somewhere in that quiet moment, they finally understood something they had resisted for a long time. If they truly want to know whether you still care, they cannot keep searching for answers through a screen. Eventually, they will have to face the person behind the profile. Eventually, they will have to replace observation with honesty. Eventually, they will have to decide whether fear is stronger than what they feel. Don't skip what comes next. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you, because the most shocking part is not that they keep an eye on you. The shocking part is why they are so afraid of what they might discover. They are not simply afraid that you have moved on. They are afraid that you have become exactly the person they always hoped you would become, and that they may no longer have a place beside you. There is something they noticed about you that they cannot unsee now, and it changed the way they looked at every single thing on your profile. They began realizing that your silence was not emptiness, it was a message. You were no longer posting to impress anyone, no longer trying to prove how you felt, and no longer leaving obvious clues for someone to follow. That made you mysterious in a way they never expected. They kept checking, hoping that one new picture, one sentence, or one small change would reveal what was happening inside your heart. But instead, every time they looked, they found another reason to wonder. Don't skip, because this is where the story becomes much deeper. They started comparing your recent energy with the person they remember from before. The difference was undeniable. You seemed calmer, more focused, more independent. And that frightened them because they suddenly understood that your life was continuing whether they were part of it or not. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you, and the reason they keep checking may be connected to a decision they have been secretly considering for longer than you realize. Last night, they opened your profile with one simple question in their mind: is there still a place for me? They expected to find an obvious answer, but instead they found uncertainty. And uncertainty made them look again. They went through things they had already seen before, remembering tiny details they once ignored. A particular expression in your face. A sentence you wrote months ago. A moment when you seemed happy. A moment when you seemed distant. They began wondering whether some of those posts had been connected to them all along. They remembered how many times they had wanted to reach out but stopped themselves. They remembered typing words and deleting them. They remembered opening your profile late at night and then pretending the next morning that they had not been thinking about you. The strange thing is that they may have convinced everyone else that they had moved on, but they could not convince themselves. Their behavior gave them away. They were still looking. Still wondering. Still searching. And last night, that realization became impossible to ignore. They began asking themselves why your presence had such power over their emotions. Why could one small change in your online activity completely alter their mood? Why could one quiet day make them worry? Why could seeing you happy make them feel both relieved and strangely heartbroken? The answer was uncomfortable. They cared more than they had admitted. They had tried to turn the connection into something simple, something they could control, but feelings do not always obey logic. They had created distance because distance felt safe. Yet the farther they stayed from you, the more they realized how much they missed the closeness they once had. And now they are standing at a strange emotional crossroads. They can continue watching silently, or they can finally acknowledge what their actions have been revealing. Don't skip. There is another detail you need to hear. At some point last night, they imagined you receiving a message from someone else. They imagined your phone lighting up with another person's name. They imagined you smiling at a message they did not send. They imagined someone else knowing your daily thoughts, hearing your stories, making you laugh, and becoming part of a life they once hoped would include them. That imagined scene affected them more than they expected. It forced them to confront a truth: you are not waiting in one place forever. You have choices. You have a future. You have people around you. And if they continue delaying, someone else may occupy the space they were too afraid to claim. This does not mean you should wait for them. It means their own hesitation is finally becoming real to them. They are beginning to understand that every day of silence has a consequence. Every unanswered feeling becomes heavier. Every postponed conversation becomes harder. Every moment they spend watching from a distance creates more uncertainty. And perhaps that is why their attention became so intense last night. They were not only checking what you were doing. They were measuring how far away from them you had become. They were looking for signs that the emotional door had closed. And the more independent you appeared, the more nervous they became. There was a moment when they nearly convinced themselves to stop looking altogether. They thought, maybe I should leave them alone. Maybe I should let them live their life. But then another thought appeared: what if I never get another chance? That second thought was stronger. It pulled them back. It made them look again. And for the first time, they understood that their silence was not protecting them anymore. It was threatening to cost them something they deeply valued. Stay till the end, because there is a powerful shift happening here. They are beginning to realize that social media cannot answer the question they truly want answered. They can watch your activity. They can notice your photos. They can read your words. They can analyze your timing.